Welcome to the Right This Way podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bennett, and today I am joined once again by my friend, Justin Finley. And I'm really excited today because we are launching a brand new series. Recently, Justin taught at our home church in Blackshear, Georgia, on the observance of communion. And as he did so, he unpacked such great information about the entire Passover meal and how the people of God would use that meal to remember what God had done to rescue them from the bondage of Egypt in order to show that God is faithful to continue that work now and into the future. And in this 4-part series, we are going to unpack more detail and give you practical ways that you can share your experiences of how God has worked in your life with the people that he brings into your life in order to point them to a Savior who is faithful to work in theirs. And if you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow this podcast and share it with your friends, as I'm sure that it will be an impactful series as you look to follow the calling of God that is placed on the life of every believer to go and make disciples. And with all that being said, let's dive in right this way.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our viewers on video.
Yeah.
We got video, so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Exciting.
I always like to think, does our voice match our face?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll have to let us know, because I still don't know how to do that. How to make your voice match the face of something that you hear and you've heard on audio for a while. I don't know. It always surprises me what people look like.
Yeah. So just so you're aware, Tim Bennett, Justin Finley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Tim Bennett. This is Justin Finley. We're happy to be back with you again on the Right This Way podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that I missed out on. Justin had the opportunity to preach on Sunday morning for us.
With the big kids.
With the big kids.
I mean, my dad told me, they came up because my dad said, hey, well, you're teaching this Sunday. I really want to be able to come up and listen to you. And I was like, Dad, I teach every Sunday. It's just with the kids. You just got to move up here so you can hear me every Sunday.
Yeah, you become lead and
yeah.
So while Justin was teaching the big kids, I was able to cover for him and teach the kids, the actual kids.
Yeah.
So I missed out on your talk from Sunday, but I listened to a little bit of it on YouTube, right? Our recording of our service. So if you'd like to get the full sermon on communion, go to Destination Church on YouTube, Destination Church in Blackshear, and you can look up the Essential Study. There's all kinds of great sermons on there, but yours was on communion.
Yes.
And the thing that I really loved about it was it really spoke to how the Israelites and the people of God told the story of how God worked in their life. And in my mind, it clicked. That's what discipleship is. That's what disciple making is telling the people that you're talking to and you want to disciple how God moved in your life up till now, and build in ways to remember that so that moving forward from this generation to this generation, to this generation, to this generation, that's the only way the generations will know how God helped.
And you're seeing not only in your life that the Lord has been trustworthy to you, that he's been faithful to you. And so you're building that foundation so you have something to fall back upon when things get hard again. You're able to fall back on that. But also, as you're able to tell the story and show people, what you're hoping for is that the Lord would do it again in their life.
That's right.
Yeah, as because he's been faithful to you, he's been faithful to me, he can be faithful to you as well.
Absolutely.
And so, we talked all about communion. There's a lot that could be said in communion, even as far as, the different beliefs about it, as far as, is it transubstantiation? Is it, or is it just that Christ's spirit is in it, and all of that? And I made clear in the beginning of our talk, like, hey, I'm not talking about any of that. Like, listen. Even Martin Luther at the end of his conversation with Ziegler was like, listen, I don't know. But if the Lord told me to eat dung because it's good for me, then I would do it. So I think that's the same stance that I was taking. Listen, it's a great mystery of Christ, but at the same time, the Lord asked us to do it. And so we're going to do it and trust and see the relevance and hear the story and remember.
Absolutely. I loved all of the other things that you brought in. Like, because when we have communion at church, most of the time in most of the churches across America, when they have communion, they have the bread and the cup, or the cracker and the cup of juice or whatever it is to remember the Lord's Supper. And really, we remember that moment with Jesus and his disciples when he set it up. And in First Corinthians, then you read that passage, right? Do this in remembrance of me, right? And so we read that passage, but you brought in so much of the Passover element,
because the first part of it,
I didn't even know.
The first part, it literally says the week of the festival of unleavened bread was upon them. They were figuring out where they were going to eat the Passover meal. And so during this week of holiday, celebration, there was one meal that the Israelites would have as a Passover meal to remember how the Lord had led them out of slavery in Egypt. And so that was the meal. It was the remembrance meal.
And all of the, you had something dipped in salt. Was there something dipped in salt?
Yeah. There was little appetizers with bitter herbs. So, golly, going into the story, I mean, because you look at the story from Exodus and you see that the Lord called Moses, and as he told them, he gave them, there was 4 promises. There was, I've called you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I want to free you from being slaves. I want to redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of power. And I want to make you my own people. Those are kind of the 4 promises that the Israelites would remember throughout the Passover meal. And so they promised that to Moses. Moses brought that to the people, and the people were like, well, who is this guy? Right? They were like, who is the Lord? Who is? And so Moses like, the I am, and they were like, who is the I am? They had been slaves in Egypt for so long, they didn't even, there was no relationship there between them and the Lord. And so eventually the Lord led them out of Egypt, went through the 10 plagues, terrible, terrible plagues, which I'm sure we'll get into as we continue the conversation. But that final plague, when the angel of death passing throughout all of Egypt, and every firstborn male would die, the Lord gave them a way out. And he said first thing was to be ready, bake bread without yeast, which is unleavened bread, the festival of unleavened bread. So they would bake bread without yeast. They would take and then they would kill a perfect, spotless lamb. They had to have these different regulations on it, that this lamb had to be perfect. It had to be a male. It had to be without blemish, without sickness, without any of that. And so they would kill the lamb. They dipped a hyssop branch in its blood, waved the blood over the door frame of their house. And so what that would tell is that the angel of death, when it was walking through the camp, he would see the blood of the doorpost and say, hey, not just that God's chosen people are here, but that something has already died for this house. The firstborn has already died in this household. I can pass over the household. And so the angel of death passed over the Israelites because they obeyed the Lord and they did what he commanded. And so from then, Pharaoh let them go. They left Egypt and they exited out. Yeah. So the salt water, one of the first appetizers, we're kind of skipping a few things, but they would dip some parsley in the salt water and then they would eat it, and it would remind them of the bitter tears that they shed while they were in slavery. It was painful. It was hardship. It was work. It was labor 24/7, maybe not 24/7, but definitely 7 days a week without a break, no vacation time, no PTO. Right. It was hard labor building cities, making bricks for the Egyptians, and it was an ordeal, and it was bitter and it was painful. And so they would eat this, they would eat the salt water to remind them of the tears, and the parsley to remind them of the hyssop branch that was dipped in the lamb's blood.
And it was like a hopeless situation for the Israelites, I can imagine. Yeah. Because just as you just said, they had been in Egypt for so long that they couldn't really even remember how they got there and what the promises of God were for them. How long had it been since Joseph was one of the rulers in Egypt, right?
I mean, even the Pharaoh forgot. The Pharaoh
didn't remember, because a new Pharaoh came in and was like, hey, these Israelites are going to overthrow us if we don't do something. Yeah. So we're going to make them slaves. And then it was, a couple generations of slaves that are in Egypt that are now this is my life now, right? Making bricks, building things for the Egyptians. This is my life. They'd forgotten the promises that God had for them, that they were God's people, right? They'd forgotten those things that he promised Joseph's fathers, all the way back to.
We do see in the first passage right before the Lord offered those 4 promises to Moses, and he said, I have heard the cry of the Israelites. So we know that not all, right? Yeah. I'm sure some,
sure.
But at the same time, they were crying out to the Lord, hey, do you remember the promise you made to our forefather Abraham? And because that doesn't look like that's ever going to happen.
And there are lots of people now in our culture here in 2024 who are probably kind of looking at life without a whole lot of hope. Like, this is my life now, right? And this is always going to be the way it's always going to be. And unless there can be those people like us as followers of Jesus who come alongside them and say, look what Jesus did in my life and how he was faithful in my life, and build in those practices to be able to share with them, to show that God's faithful, to show that God can do it, show that God's promises are true, that his faithfulness is true. That unless there are those people who will step up and have those stories and share those stories with people that they meet, that's going to become an increasing issue, is the hopelessness around us. So we have to build in things like that. I was just so intrigued with the YouTube video.
And I think as well, like, because you got my brain thinking even more about that. First, the call, I have heard the cry of the Israelites. Do you remember the promises you made to my forefathers, right? He heard their cries. And so I think there can be a definite distinction between trying to draw them in with like a prosperity idea, like, hey, this is the only thing, you just want all these good things that the Lord has to offer. But if there's never that first cry out, if they never look at their life and say, man, I'm stuck in this is not good. If they don't have those moments of repentance, of saying, I need help, I need to get out of this situation, then it's in those moments that we can show them the gospel, show them the life of Jesus, show them what the Lord has done for us, show them what he has to offer us. And that, that's true. It's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance. Yes. But it leads us to repentance because we're typically already at a place of brokenness. And we see the slavery that we're in. And that was the Israelites' problem. Once they left Egypt, they kept wanting to go back to Egypt. Like, they were in slavery, but they saw the good things back there, So there has to be this, I'm turning away from this and I'm never going back.
It was just, it's just a great thing for us to like. So I need to do this. And I know that like I know that my parents, and should your parents as well, like as we were growing up, like there were things that, like, I guess my dad has one of these things that he's a mechanic. And so he had always, we've always driven as a family, because he could keep them on the road. We never had like new cars. We drove, right?
He just fixed them.
He just fixed them. So they weren't awful, but they weren't new. We never went and bought a car, really, right? We would buy cars, but they were from people or used car lot, kind of things that he knew he could fix up to be able to get us from point A to point B. And so when he became a missionary, he travels a lot, right? Drives like 40,000, 50,000 miles a year.
Goodness.
And so one of the questions that the board or the leaders of that organization that he started with, one of the questions that they had for him was, listen, you travel a lot. You're going to be driving a lot. We know the cars you're driving. I don't think those cars are making it. So one of the things that you'll have to put in the budget is a payment for a car, because you need a car, a reliable transportation to get to these churches, to get to the things that you need to do. And he said, well, I don't really know if I will or not. And they said, pretty confident you do. I don't know if you've seen your car. He's like, well, no, I could probably keep these cars on the road. God has given me the ability to be able to fix them and get them on the road, or he'll give me the finances to get the car that I need. I don't need to put that in my plans, because I have faith that God's going to provide either the skills for me to fix this car, or he's going to provide the car that I need to get there. Right. So it's not going to come out of my pocket. Except for like the parts to fix it, stuff like that. So since then, from 1998 till now, my parents have never like gone into debt to buy a car or done any of that kind of stuff, because people, when they got home from that meeting, there was a person who owned the car lot that he worked at that said, hey, this van just came in and it's great, but the owners just traded it in and we don't have any use for it. If you could fix it up, it's great, fantastic. So there was there was a van for them, waiting for them when they got back from that meeting. And from then, for the last 20 years, they haven't ever been lacking that. And it isn't like they had, a 2023, whatever it might be, vehicle, like brand new every time, but it's been provided. That need has been provided.
Yeah.
And he can go back. And I know many times we've shared that story together, and I can look at all the cars that they drive all the time and remember the story, and remember that faithfulness, and see it in each of the practical vehicles that we drive, the vehicles that they drive.
We've got a little bit of a similar story. My parents were given a van when we didn't have, our car broke down. We didn't have anything. We were not a very wealthy family. We couldn't afford a new car.
Yeah.
And somebody just gave us a van. That happened to me and my wife as well. We got in a bad car accident, totaled the car, and then somebody gave us a van. And it's just crazy to be able to see, you put his kingdom first, and all these things will be added onto you. He will be faithful to you.
I mean, we came down when we first knew that South Georgia was the place that God had called our family from, up Pennsylvania, upstate New York. One of the big hurdles that we had was, where do we first move to? Right? What do we move to? An apartment? I don't have a ton of, I was working up there. I had a full-time job at a bank. I don't have a ton of PTO to take a month to go down and stay with somebody or a hotel to look at houses, right? I don't really love the idea of renting an apartment from someone that's online or something, and not ever seeing it firsthand before we move our family down to it. Even houses, we're not going to be there to see if we want to buy this house or that house, or if it's in a neighborhood that we like, or any of that kind of stuff, right? So there was a big question mark about where we live when we moved down. And we shared that with some of the churches around here and the people that we were working with, and prayed about it. Didn't know how that was going to work out. And then one of the couples from one of the churches that we started with called us and said, "Hey, my mother-in-law is her health is getting down, and we need to move her out closer to us. So we bought a little mobile home that she can live in right on our property. But her house that she lives in Waycross is going to be empty, and we need somebody to be in that or sell it or whatever. So would that work out for you if you move down? And then really all you do have to do is pay the utilities and the water and electric and that kind of stuff. And then you don't have to pay rent or anything like that. And that'll give you time to get down here and get set up." I mean, that was a fantastic example of how God moved forward in ahead of us, moved in a way that would allow us to get to where he had called us to be without us having to figure it out ourselves. We just prayed, sent the need out to people, and God fulfilled it through those people. And so that's one thing that we now drive around, and we can drive around in Waycross with our kids. And as we drive around, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's the house we used to stay in. That's the house we used to stay in, kids. Yep. You remember how that house came about? Why God did that for us." And just a story of that to be able to share with your family or with your kids or with people around. When people come say, "Hey, how'd you get to Waycross?" Well, let me tell you how I got to Waycross. And so it's just practical ways to be able to tell the story of remember what God has done for you. So you can point to things that he's going to do for you.
Yeah, sure. And one of the things we'll say with our kids ministry, we have our core values, and one of the last ones is, change the world. And one of the things we'll tell the kids in that core value is hey, listen, we want you to build a habit of sharing your story, sharing the story of what God has done in your life and in the world around you. And we would say, make faith an everyday topic of conversation, So when you have those physical reminders, it's so much easier to be able to start the story, to be able to share the story. Hey, look at that house. Hey, look at this. Or they ask a question. I have so many kids. Since y'all are seeing us for the first time, I've got a tattoo here. It's got the map of the world on it. It's got certain countries colored in, countries that are visited. but then above it says, "Here I am, send me," from Isaiah. And so like I've had so many people ask me about that tattoo. Like, that is such a cool tattoo. Where'd you get that? Or like, what's that for? What's it mean? What does "Here I am, send me" mean? And I'm able to start the story. Well, listen, I believe my life. I believe I am called to share the good news. Have you heard the good news? Wait, what good news? And I'm able to share from there. And so it's a great conversation starter. I've even looking at my wristband that I got today. We got wristbands on. This one says not that far away. And it's from a spoken word by a guy that I listened to a while back. And it just reminds me, hey, listen, where even if you're in a broken spot, if you feel like you're too far gone, listen, you're not that far away from one act of the Lord that can change your life forever. You just gotta meet him. You just gotta see him, guys. You're not that far away. And so it's conversation starters, having these things around you that can easily spark a conversation into faith are just another little handicap to help you get there, right?
Right.
And so in the same way, the Passover meal was much of a way to remember the story of what God had done. And one of the first things that they would do is they would hold up a cup of toast, a cup of wine, and they would say a prayer, the prayer of sanctification. They would start to remember the story, and it represented that first promise, "I have called you out." That's what sanctification means. It's set apart. It's called out. And so the Lord promised them, "I called you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians." And so they prayed a Jewish prayer, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe." And then they would launch into a thanksgiving for the Lord setting them apart, setting Abraham and his descendants apart. And in the same way, we can look at our lives and say, how has the Lord set me apart? He has called me out. What has he called me out of? And not only just set me out from slavery, but like, man, he wants, Yeah. And that's the way I look at that cup of sanctification. He wants me. He desires me. He desires to be with me. He wants to be able to change me. He wants what's best for me. He's looked among the crowd of 1,000,000 and said, that's the guy that I want, for this specific thing. And yeah, he offers that to everybody, but there's still a very personal aspect to that, saying he wants me,
Yeah.
I'm special to him. I'm chosen to him. And so being able to say, be able to bring that into conversation, have little markers in your life where you can say, listen, he wants you. Yes, and the Lord loves you. He has called you. It's his kindness that is drawing you in. There is so much for you that the Lord has for you. And he wants to call you out of the thing that you're in because he has something better.
Sure. Yeah. And even to be able to see things in people's lives that the enemy is at work too, right? And as much as like he is calling us out, there is, the Pharaoh that doesn't want us to leave Egypt, right? Like there is the ruler of that land where we aren't supposed to be that wants us to stay there.
There's the comfort of the good food.
Yeah. the comfort of roof over your head and those kind of things in that Egypt world that they lived under Pharaoh. And
that's so good.
There's an enemy that wants us to stay there and doesn't want what God could do with a life surrendered to him to see those things. God could do something with that life. And if I can squash it now, right, and put some hurdles in the way, that they're never going to get to that place because they're only going to see the hopelessness. So they're like, even people that I talk to, they'll be excited about something that they're trying to do to help people, right? And I'm thinking of one person in particular that was, had a bunch of stuff she was saying that she was trying to do in the community to help people from the same situation that she came out of. And she's not a follower of Jesus yet, but she wants to help people. And so she was helping people out of addictions and different things like that. And then a lot of stuff, she almost got it set up. It's almost there. And then a lot of stuff has started to go wrong in her life. And, she has a background of knowing some things about the Bible and such. And so I said, these things aren't coincidences. I don't believe that they're coincidences. You were so close to this. And there is a real enemy that is trying to get you to stop before it even starts. And let's I'm praying that won't stop you. I'm praying that that you'll be able to keep going, because I believe God has something great that he's called you to, that he will be able to use for something fantastic. And there's somebody that's trying to squash it.
And the Pharaoh made it harder.
Made it so
much harder. He was like, listen, now you got to use half the wheat to make your bricks. It's like, no, or now you got to go get your own. He's making it really hard for them. They're telling Moses to stop trying. Just leave us alone. Yeah.
And how many times in the Bible does it say when they were in the wilderness that he just led us out in the wilderness to die in the wilderness?
Yeah, they're complaining about
let's turn around and go back to Egypt.
At the same time, he's giving them something to eat every day, something to drink every day, and
yeah, we do that so often, man.
And that was one of the things that I was really thinking about as well. Like Moses went up to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." So that the Lord says, "Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the desert." Right, and that's where it is. It's we're being let go so we can be free to serve him. We have, we're no longer bound by our sin. Now we're serving him, right? And so it's not like we're just transferring ownership. We are free in it, free from the slavery, free from the sin, but we are moving towards him as well. We're going to worship him. We're going to live for him
in a place where he's providing everything for us, and we can't provide anything.
Yeah.
Like in the wilderness, the Israelites, like everything that happened good for them had to be from God. It was not because of them. Like they traveled for 40 years in the wilderness, and I'm sure there were some struggles, but they made it, right? Like, you don't lead a group that size out into the wilderness.
They made it much quicker than 40 years and then decided they didn't want the land the Lord promised to them. Yeah.
But they traveled for a long time and were sustained in that. And I was reminded when we were talking about that, to worship him, like in our weaknesses, he's made stronger. Therefore, I will boast more gladly in my weakness.
Yeah.
So that the power of Christ may be seen in me. The enemies that they came across when they were in the wilderness, the wars that they fought and the battles that they faced were won because of Jesus, only because of God's work in their life. Not anything more. Like the other enemies couldn't point to this miraculous army that came to them, because these people were traveling in the wilderness for years and years and years.
Yep.
Thank you so much once again for joining us. We are so grateful for each of our listeners and now our viewers on YouTube. And with this being our launch on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Our prayer is to positively impact your disciple-making efforts and the efforts of those people around you. So share this podcast with your friends, your family, maybe your church family. We would be so honored and grateful to see this podcast reach its full potential. Well, have a great day, and until we see each other again next time, keep following Jesus, and remember that a life of disciple making is right this way.